Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Female Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Danni, and today I have decided to do a solo podcast. And the topic of today's podcast is going to be managing a social life or social occasions whilst pursuing your body composition or performance related goals. And I have decided to do this podcast. I think it's very relevant because of the world starting to open up a little bit more, especially in the UK. Obviously, we've just come out of, we're slowly coming out of lockdown. So this is a very relevant subject as places like restaurants and bars and clubs start to gradually open back up again. And people have certainly, I know my friends and my clients have missed having a bit of a social life. So I thought it would be good to record this podcast to help you manage those occasions and feel less fear around them, knowing that you can manage them competently and still succeed with your goals. And at the end of the day, life is to be lived, and we've all had a long period of time without a proper social life, and I know that is something that a lot of you guys will value very highly. It's something that I personally value very highly, and being social is extremely good for your health at the end of the day, and it's a huge positive part of our lives. And like I said, life is to be lived, and I think for most people it's appropriate to have an element of quote unquote balance in your life whilst you go about pursuing your goals. Now, obviously, there's periods of time where you might have to let go of some of that balance, such as if you are currently in a competition prep. However, during the improvement season, and for those of you who don't have goals of stepping on a bodybuilding stage, you can certainly make great performance and body composition and health related progress without taking it to the extreme and while still enjoying elements of life such as social occasions. So be rest assured that you can do that. You can have a life, and you do not have to live your life off chicken, rice and broccoli in order to make progress by any means. And in reality, if you are more flexible with your approach, if you follow an inclusive approach to dieting, if you allow yourself to enjoy things like social occasions, you're going to enjoy the process a lot more. You're going to be able to maintain your efforts for a longer period of time. So you'll probably make more progress with whatever your goal is right now. And you will then be able to sustain that progress rather than getting to the end of a fat loss phase, for example, and then going to the other end of the spectrum and ending up regaining all of the weight and potentially more than what you'd lost due to pushing yourself to the extreme end of the spectrum and not being able to sustain your efforts. So being flexible with your approach has so many benefits, and it will result in more long-term success, which is what we are striving for. So please do recognize that and allow yourselves to live your lives. So first of all, when it comes to managing your social life and social occasions, you need to consider what your goal is, because that is going to influence what protocols are appropriate for you to follow. So for example, if your goal is fat loss, we know that you need to sustain a calorie deficit in order to succeed with that goal. So therefore, you are going to have to exercise a little bit more discipline, and you're going to have to be a little bit more regimented because you have less calories to play with. You have to expend more energy than what you consume to sustain a calorie deficit, and therefore your consumption of calories has to be controlled, and you're going to have less wiggle room. So you're going to have to exercise a little bit more discipline, a little bit more restraint, and it would probably be smart to track to some extent, or at least be a little bit calculated in some way with your approach to social occasions. So you might have a look at the menu in advance and plan what you are going to get and choose a lower calorie option from the menu. You could then track that roughly into MyFitnessPal or whatever app you use to track your calories, and then track the rest of the day around that to ensure that you are within your calorie targets for the day. Alternatively, you could not track, but you're still going to have to be very mindful and exercise quite a lot of restraint to ensure that you are able to sustain a calorie deficit if your goal is fat loss. So if you're not going to track, you're still going to have to go for a lower calorie option. You might decide to do things like ask for the dressing on the side and ask for the meal to be cooked without any oil or butter or anything like that, just to bring the calorie content down. And you might choose to ask for the meal without the main carb source. So for example, if the meal contains say it's chicken pitas and you get fries on the side, you might ask to swap the fries for salad, and you might ask for all of the sauces and dressings on the side. That's just an example so that you can control the calories that you're consuming and adhere to your calorie deficit. If you want to be really, really safe, if your goal is fat loss, you might want to order something such as a chicken salad with the dressing on the side. It's a really safe option. It's low in calories, and you're probably going to be within your calorie targets if you decide to do that. Another option is maybe something like a steak and salad or steak and green veg. And usually you'll find, do you know, when you go to restaurants, if you ask for certain things, such as asking for steamed or boiled vegetables as opposed to vegetables cooked in oil, and if you ask for your dressing on the side, the restaurants will usually be absolutely fine with that. So don't hesitate to do that. And if you are in a very extreme fat loss phase, such as a competition prep, then you might want to take your own food and just give the restaurant a call ahead of time and ask if they're okay with that. But that's only with an extreme goal such as a competition prep. If you are not in a competition prep, please do not go and take your own food to restaurants. Just go and enjoy something off the menu and factor it into your calorie targets for the day. If your goal is fat loss, you could also potentially consider saving calories in the run up to the social occasion, just to give you a little bit more wiggle room. So an example of that is if you saved 100 calories Monday to Friday and your meal was on the Saturday, you would then have an extra 500 calories to play with on the Saturday, and you could order something a little bit more calorie dense if you want to indulge a little bit more, or if you want a few drinks as well as your meal, for example. You could save calories in the run up to the occasion. However, what I would recommend is that you don't make this excessive, because what you might find is that if you save an excessive number of calories in the run up to a social occasion, you might end up feeling super restricted and super hungry by the time that social occasion comes around, and then you will be much more prone to overeating. And I generally wouldn't recommend taking the approach of saving calories in the run up to a social occasion if you have ever suffered with anything like binge eating tendencies, because that can increase the likelihood of that happening again, which isn't something that we want. So if you have a bad relationship with food, if you're prone to binge eating tendencies, if you've ever struggled with that in the past, I would not recommend saving calories in the run up to social occasions. Just manage it on the day itself and try and choose something smart which is within your calorie targets for the day. But it is an option if you do have a really good relationship with food. If it doesn't bother you saving a couple of 100 calories a day for a social occasion on the weekend, then absolutely go for it, as long as you're able to manage that well and it doesn't come along with any negatives from a mental health perspective or a relationship with food perspective. If you're okay with that, it's absolutely fine. But again, just don't do it to an excessive extent. If you're in a calorie deficit already and you're saving 500 calories per day for a social occasion on top of that, your energy levels are going to be pretty low on those days where you're saving calories, and your training performance and your recovery may therefore take a little bit of a hit. So if you're going to save calories in the run up to a social occasion, don't make it excessive. I would only save maximum a couple of 100 calories per day, especially if you're already in a calorie deficit, because you don't want to be having a negative effect on your training performance, which is going to hinder your progress anyway. So if you're going to do that, do it in a moderate fashion and just save a couple of 100 calories per day. And don't do it if you've ever struggled with things like binge eating prior to, well, in the past ever, really. And if your goal is then maintenance, you have a little bit more room for flexibility, but you're still going to have to be mindful. You can't just throw the kitchen sink at your diet when you exit a fat loss phase and go to maintenance. You still have to maintain certain habits that you've put into place through the fat loss phase. If you wish to sustain your progress, you're still going to have to stay active. You're still going to have to get your training sessions done so that you can maintain the amount of muscle tissue you're carrying and expend energy alongside that. You're still going to have to make smart choices in regards to nutrition in order to be at maintenance and not be in a calorie surplus. So you have got more room for flexibility, but you're still going to have to be mindful. Now, if you're in a calorie surplus, your goal is hypertrophy, you probably don't need to worry too much about social occasions, because you have a much larger quantity of calories to play with anyway. And at the end of the day, if you're in a slightly bigger surplus the odd day, it's not going to hold you back with progressing towards your goal, which is to build muscle tissue. As long as you are in a calorie surplus, you're recovering well, you're healthy, and you're training hard, you will succeed with the goal of hypertrophy, so putting on new muscle tissue. If you eat a few extra calories during a social occasion, it's not going to make your progress with hypertrophy slower, so don't worry about that. Yes, if you consume an excessive number of calories on a regular basis, you're going to gain body fat much quicker. But on the odd occasion, if you've got the odd social occasion and you eat a little bit extra and your goal is hypertrophy anyway, it's really not worth losing any sleep over. Just move on the next day and carry on as you normally would. Yes, if you consume over your calorie target, if you are tracking on a regular basis, you're going to gain body fat at a slightly faster rate, but it's not going to hold you back with the goal of hypertrophy, so it's not worth sweating over or anything like that. And if your goal is hypertrophy, if you are in a calorie surplus or even at maintenance, I would say that there's absolutely no harm in having some time away from tracking, or eventually transitioning away from tracking your food altogether. I think actually there are a lot of benefits to doing so, and it would serve a lot of people well to get to that point. So during social occasions, just take a little bit of a break from tracking your intake if your goal is not fat loss, and be mindful around food. So sit down with your meals, chew your food properly, eat nice and slowly without distractions so that you are present, and try and be as in tune with your body's own physiological hunger cues as possible. Eat when you're hungry and eat slowly, chew your food properly. If you get to the point where you are full, you can leave the rest of your food on your plate. That is absolutely fine. And if you learn how to be in tune with your body's own physiological hunger cues, and you get to the point where you can really listen to your body, and you stabilize after a fat loss phase, you will find that you're able to maintain maintenance. Eventually you'll get to a point where you are able to stay pretty stable, and you won't feel the need to overeat during social occasions if you learn to be in tune with your body's own hunger cues. So I think eventually that should be the goal for most people, to get to a point where they don't need to track every single day of their lives. Yes, you might come back to it as a tool if you ever want to pursue fat loss again, or you might use it every now and again just to see where your calories are at, but we shouldn't have to rely on it for the rest of our lives. And I think for most people, it should be a goal to eventually get to a point where you don't need to track. So I certainly think during social occasions, if your goal is maintenance or you're in a calorie surplus, just take some time away from tracking and enjoy yourself. Still hit the fundamentals throughout the rest of the day. I would still get a few servings of protein in. I would still eat plenty of whole foods, stay hydrated, tick the basic boxes, but you don't need to meticulously track every gram of food that you are consuming. So that was a little bit of a ramble on tracking, but let me know if you have any questions on that in the comments down below. And then we come on to the subject of alcohol. So obviously during social occasions, there can be a tendency for people to consume alcohol. And I often get the question, is alcohol allowed when you're trying to progress towards body composition or performance related goals? And of course it is, like, in moderation. Obviously it can have negative effects on your ability to progress or the rate of progress which you might see. But a lot of the reasons for that is just down to the way that you feel either on the night when you're consuming the alcohol and the increased tendency to overeat as a result of that, or the way that you feel the next day when you have a hangover and you're not able to get your training sessions done. So if you're smart about it, you can certainly consume alcohol and still make great progress. Doing things like trying to get your steps done before you go out, trying to get your training sessions done elsewhere in the week, and having the next day after you've had a drink as a rest day, things like that can be really smart, so that you don't have to worry if you are a little bit hungover and you have to have a rest day. You've already got your training sessions done elsewhere in the week, so it's not a problem anyway. And you've already ticked those boxes. So things like that can be really useful tools if you're going to consume alcohol. And then if your goal is fat loss, again, you're going to have to be much more disciplined, and you're going to have to put in place a lot more restraint because you've got less calories to play with. So you're probably going to want to go for a lower calorie alcohol, such as a clear spirit with a diet mixer. That could be gin and diet lemonade. It could be gin and slimline tonic. It could be vodka diet coke, vodka diet lemonade, whatever you want. But I would recommend something like a clear spirit with a diet mixer because it's very low in calories, and you therefore don't have to sacrifice as many calories from food. And that means that you're probably going to feel a little bit better throughout the rest of the day. And it means that it's going to make it much easier to adhere to your calorie deficit. So if your goal is fat loss, I would definitely go for one of those drinks. And what I would do is I would work out how many calories of alcohol you're roughly going to be consuming, and then save that amount of calories from carbs and fats. Don't save calories from alcohol from protein, because that is the most important macronutrient if you have body composition or performance related goals, or even health based goals, to be completely honest with you. So save your calories from carbs and fats. What I would do, like I said, is just work out roughly how many calories you're going to need, and then save that number of calories and plan the rest of your day around that. And how you can find out how many calories you need to save is just find out how many calories are in your desired drink. Say that's gin and slimline tonic. Find out how many calories are in one gin and slimline tonic. Decide how many drinks you're roughly going to have. Say that's 4. Find out how many calories are in 4 gin and slimline tonics, and then save that number of calories for your drinks for the night, and save it from carbs and fats. So that's if you're in a calorie deficit. If you're at maintenance, again, you've got a little bit more wiggle room, so you could maybe afford to have the odd slightly more calorie dense drink, and you could just take some time away from tracking as opposed to working out the exact calories, but you're still going to have to be mindful and practice some form of restraint. And then if your goal is to be in a calorie surplus, you've probably got enough calories to play with anyway. So like I said previously, if I was you, I would just take some time away from tracking and enjoy yourself, and just get straight back to your usual routine the next day and carry on as you usually would after a good night's sleep. But whatever your goal is, if you have social occasions, it's really important not to over restrict in the run up to those occasions. to the point where you're going out for a meal starving, for example, it's a little bit of a recipe for disaster. If you think about, imagine if you restricted really heavily in the run up to an evening meal. Imagine if you fasted in the morning and then you literally just ate protein and veggies all day in the run up to that evening meal. You're going to get to that evening meal and be ravenous. And if you're ravenous, you're going to be so much more likely to overeat, especially when you've got friends and family in front of you eating potentially very calorie dense foods such as desserts and what's an example, pizzas and burgers and things like that. If your goal is fat loss and you excessively restrict in the run up to an evening meal, and then you're surrounded by those foods alongside cocktails, wine, prosecco, whatever it is, you're going to want to consume those foods in excessive quantities. Whereas if you go into that evening meal relatively satisfied because you've ate normally throughout the rest of the day, you're going to be much more likely to be able to restrain yourself and be satisfied making a smart choice. You're going to be much less likely to overconsume food. So don't excessively restrict yourself in the run up to an evening meal. And that applies to saving calories throughout the week as well. Like I mentioned previously, if your goal is fat loss or maintenance, you might decide to save calories in the run up to that occasion. But if you do that, it's really important, again, not to do that to an excessive extent. I don't want you saving hundreds and hundreds of calories each day, because one, you will feel pretty terrible, and two, you'll be a lot more prone to overeating during the social occasion if you feel restricted in the run up to it. So just be smart with your approach and try to think long term, and don't do, usually anything on the extreme end of the spectrum probably isn't the best protocol. So try and find a middle ground and be smart with your approach to social occasions, but go and enjoy yourself. And also try and stay on top of your protein intake and your hydration throughout the day, as this will prevent you from getting overly hungry, and it will also mean that you probably feel a lot better if you stay hydrated in the run up to consuming alcohol, rather than waking up in the morning super dehydrated as a result of alcohol consumption and not being hydrated throughout the rest of the day. So they are my top tips for managing social occasions. And I just want you guys to know that I enjoy social occasions now as well. Obviously, there was a time, well, many times in my life during the many contest preps that I have ran. I competed 2016, 2017, 2018 and 2020. So I did 4 full years of competing. And during those times when I was on prep, I would take my own food to social occasions. I wouldn't have anything to drink, but that was what was in line with my values and my goals at the time. And that was what was necessary for me to achieve that goal of stepping on stage. And if you're a competitor in prep right now, that is what's necessary for you to do. And that should make you happy, because that's what's in line with your goals at this moment in time. Now, I've come away from competing personally now, and I now value my social life and my mental and physical health above my physique. So I will go and enjoy social occasions. I do have the odd drink every now and again, and I do enjoy whatever foods I want to enjoy off a menu. And I want you guys to know that. And I don't want you to feel guilty for enjoying yourself and having a life outside of training, because it's so important. It's so good for your health to have a life outside of training. It's so good for your health to be social, and it's going to result in more long-term success. So please, please, please never feel bad, never feel guilty for enjoying yourself, and recognize that training and whatever your nutrition protocols are, whether that's rough guidelines or whether it's tracking, and whatever your goals are, those goals and your training and your nutrition, it's a part of your life. It's not something which has to consume your entire life. especially, like I said, if you're not someone who has an extreme goal, such as stepping on stage, think about what you value and think about the way that you want to live your life. And I know this might sound deep, but you never know when it's going to be your last day on this earth. So think about how you want to live your life and what you're willing to sacrifice to achieve certain goals, and make sure that your actions are in line with what you value in life. I, for example, value my social life and my health. So I need to make sure that my actions are in line with that, that I am prioritizing my mental and physical health, that I am attending social occasions and enjoying time with friends and family. I value them and I value that time with them. I value being present. So it's really important for me to enjoy these occasions and to not feel any sort of guilt for enjoying them. And I want to be an example of how you can still make great progress without having to sacrifice absolutely every other aspect of your life, and without your entire life having to revolve around training and nutrition. And don't get me wrong, I have been there in the past, so it's important to bear that in mind. I have been through phases of my life where my whole life has revolved around training and nutrition, and that's what's required to get into the condition that is required for the stage. But I'm not there now, and my physique has now changed in line with that. Obviously, I'm carrying more body fat, but I'm very happy in my own body. And this body that I am in right now represents health, and it represents me having a social life, and it represents my values changing away from stepping on stage. So, bit of a ramble there, but I just wanted you guys to know that I'm not just speaking as though you should enjoy social occasions and you should be flexible. And I'm not doing that myself, because I am being flexible. And like I said, I want to promote health. I want to promote an all-inclusive approach to achieving your goals, and I want you to have an element of balance in your life and to do what really makes you happy. Because like I said, I know it's deep, but you never know when it's going to be your last day, and you want to be satisfied with how you've spent your life and make sure that that is really in line with what makes you happy and your individual values, whatever they may be, whether that's stepping on stage or whether that's having a social life and being able to progress alongside that. You choose, you dictate what you do, and you dictate ultimately whether you're happy or not, and what your choices are, and whether you achieve your goals because of those choices. So you decide for yourself, do what makes you happy, and do what is in line with your goals and your values. I will leave that there, guys. Thank you so much for listening, as always. If you do enjoy the content on the Female Fitness Podcast, it would mean the absolute world if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. And if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, it genuinely means the world. And if you could share that you're listening on your Instagram story, I would appreciate that massively. Your support is what genuinely keeps me going and keeps me recording these podcasts. So thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope this podcast was helpful. Let me know your thoughts. Drop me a message on Instagram, and I will see you next Monday.